I have Mercedes Sparks right over here to my side. Hi, Mercedes.
Hi, Lance.
Now, I have to say, these news cycles get me so stressed out, Mercedes, that I find that my joints are inflamed. I feel stress. I feel sometimes agitated, and I have to actually double down on my spiritual, psychological, and physical discipline. And part of that is my dietary intake. And one of the great solutions I found to a daily routine is the ancient nutrition products. Now, I started off because I done a little bit of work with Jordan in the past, Jordan Rubin and his partners. But then I started actually working with their products. And I like them so much that I keep bringing him back. I call him he's like our modern day Edison out there in the farm. He actually has a farm where he's like, that's his laboratory. And he's working on all these kind of schemes and concoctions. But he comes up with things, and a lot of them come out of his own trauma. Did you know that? His own struggles with health and all that. It's an incredible story. But I want to bring the Edison back because every time they have a new development or a new product, I ask to be notified, and I get notified and pull him out early to give us a release on what in the world is he coming up with, because I think God's going to continue to give him downloads to take care of my generation, because the kinds of ailments that he's addressing actually are more like my demographic than anything. Do we have Dr. Jordan Rubin here? Ha-ha!
I am here, Lance. Thank you for the kind words.
Well, thank you, my friend. And am I right in saying that some of these products come out of your own personal battles, and it's almost like you go through an adversity and then you fight back with an insight? Is that true?
That is true, and I've asked God for other means for product development and innovation very often. But they say necessity is the mother of invention, and I would also say that desperation is the father of invention. So we can coin that right now, but that is how my life has gone. I think we are called on to solve problems based on our desperate circumstances. And what we're going to talk about today is one such innovation. Not only did it come from my desperation, but it started not just a product, but an entire company. In fact, this product came to be before ancient nutrition was in existence, if you can understand that.
All right, so tell me what, all right, so I want to talk about that product. Tell me the first one, and what was the circumstances that surrounds that?
Well, the product is bone broth protein, and not only is it the first ancient nutrition product, it is the first bone broth protein ever developed. It is patented, and it came about because the world's number one superfood, yes, you heard me say it, the world's number one superfood was only able to be consumed by a 24 to 48 hour time of cooking and preparing, and even more time cleaning. Only recently is it available to buy prepared in stores, but in order to get the nutrients in this quintessential superfood bone broth, it needs to be prepared a special way. And so I was battling a serious knee injury. And when I say serious, I did not put my foot on the ground or any weight on it for nearly 3 months. I was on crutches. We had 6 children at the time. In fact, we had recently adopted 3 more, so it was a total of 6. We were in Central California looking to do some research on another group of ingredients we call medicinal or functional mushrooms. And during that time, I had an unexplained knee and foot injury that caused me to not be able to walk, really be incapacitated. And I turned to an age-old superfood that I had written about starting in my very first book, Patient Heal Thyself, in 2002. Bone broth. Chicken soup, as my grandmother used to make it. However, I wrote about chicken soup or bone broth in almost every one of my books with a recipe that took 24 to 48 hours. Certainly, it was difficult to procure the ingredients. It smelled up the house. which got real old after the second batch, the garlic broth, apple cider vinegar smell. And we had recently adopted 3 more kids. So my options were suffer or ask my wife to make bone broth for me. I think she would have taken out my good leg at the time, raising 6 kids in a new place. And I was able to find in a health food store the first organic frozen bone broth that I had ever seen. And it was made in 24, 48-hour time period, all the good stuff. And each bag was 24 ounces, and I consumed 2 bags a day. So 48 ounces of broth a day. I defrosted it, warmed it up. It was $10 a bag. So keep in mind, I was spending $20 a day, and glad to do it because I wasn't walking. I was on crutches, and I was crawling around having young children at the time and a business to run. So this particular broth consumption at this quantity started making a big difference. And I also did some other great therapies like walking on the beach. I was in Central California, so on the top sand, I would get chiropractic. I did several things. But it wasn't until I reintroduced bone broth, real old-fashioned bone broth into my diet that I began to experience results. I had such great success that in January of 2016, I planned a 10-date tour where I was going to give seminars in South Florida. I was ready to ditch the crutches and go for it. So I called my mom, who lived in South Florida at the time, and said, "Mom, can you buy me some groceries? Here's the list." And I had bone broth at the top, 20 frozen bags of bone broth. And my mom said, "Good news, Jordan." She said this a day later. "I got everything on the list except they didn't have the bone broth." So I was 2 days away from traveling without what I would consider at the time my lifeblood. And what I did was go to my laboratory, and I found some samples of a bone broth extract that I was using to formulate a brand new product for my good friend, Dr. Josh Axe. At the time, I had just started helping him create his new product line, and I used bone broth as a small inclusion. However, in this case, I grabbed as much as I could from the lab, took it with me. It was in powder form. Didn't exactly know how it would perform, but I was desperate. I needed bone broth. So I started consuming scoops of this in room temperature water 2 to 3 times a day. And I will tell you, Lance, the results were as good or better than this frozen $10 a bag bone broth that I was consuming. And I asked my team to analyze the product. I said, "What's in this?" Now, I know about broth. I know about chicken soup. I know that our ancestors consumed chicken, beef, and fish stocks as part of soups. They never wasted any part of the animal. They couldn't afford to. And I also knew that my grandmother made chicken soup and called it everything from Jewish penicillin to being good for the soul, and a whole book series. Not that my grandmother wrote the book series, but she could have. My Jewish grandmother. Both my grandmothers were Jewish, but only one of them made good broth. Let's just say that. So this powder was analyzed and sent to me, and it said it was 90% protein. And Lance, I had an epiphany. It was as if I saw a billboard that said bone broth protein. Now think about it. There's whey protein, there's egg protein, there's soy protein, there's pea protein, there's rice protein, there's lots of proteins. They all help you to some extent build muscle. But there's no proteins at the time that helped you build your entire body, including your insides. And I also noticed that bone broth protein contains something called type 2 collagen. I saw that it contained chondroitin sulfate and glucosamine sulfate, which, Lance, you probably remember 25 years ago was all the rage for joints. There was a book called, I think, The Joint Revolution that talked about consuming over 1,000 milligrams of glucosamine and chondroitin. They were the most popular supplements for anyone over 30 or 40. This was all naturally occurring in the broth, including minerals. So I called my buddy, Dr. Josh Axe, and I said, Josh, I know this is going to sound crazy, but we need to bring a brand new concept to market called bone broth protein, never been done before. And we need to find a company and name a company to create this product. So our good friend Jason said, along with some of our workshopping, well, let's call it Ancient Nutrition. But Lance, truthfully, bone broth protein was developed to save my my seminars and me from not being able to walk. And Ancient Nutrition was the perfect name to describe how an ancient superfood could be brought to the modern world in convenient fashion. And I will tell you, Josh and I have lectured extensively, have written books and articles, and we always told our friends, our clients, our patients to consume bone broth when they had gut issues, joint issues, skin issues. It was a way to reset the body. And sometimes we would say only consume broth for a number of days until you start to feel better. And it was often agreed to by our patients, clients, and friends, but the compliance was terrible because it took 24 to 48 hours and smelled up the house. So I said, Josh, imagine all the goodness of bone broth in 10 seconds. And we did a TV show once, Lance, where we were one of us making bone broth and one making bone broth protein, and the other one barely got to rip some of the, extra feathers off the bird, if you will, before I was already consuming the bone broth protein. The best part, Lance, is the bone broth protein is produced with 3 ingredients, and only one's an ingredient. Bone broth from chickens and beef, water, heat, and a little pressure. And it was made in a way that when we compared the nutrients against homemade bone broth, the same kind you would get from recipes in my books and draxe.com, we found that our bone broth protein on a per gram basis contained multiple times more collagen type 2, multiple times more chondroitin, glucosamine, and even hyaluronic acid, which people inject into their knee for joint health and their face for skin suppleness. We had more than homemade, and you could do it in seconds. And we made it, Lance, so that anyone could consume it and love it. We're talking about pure, which you can add to any food, unflavored. We have chocolate, we have vanilla, and we have 3 amazing savory flavors: chicken soup, tomato basil, and my favorite butternut squash, which you could make warm and consume. Absolutely awesome. And it's funny, Lance, I have a daughter who is 16, and she's a great athlete. She plays basketball and flag football, which is now an Olympic sport, by the way. I'm giving a plug for women's flag football. And it's funny, some days I say, Alexis, you want your second bone broth chocolate smoothie? And she says, Dad, I've been consuming this every day for 9 years. I said, wrong. You've been consuming it for 9.5. Point is, this is an essential staple for my kids, for my family. And I have said this before, if every nursery school and every assisted living facility would give a shot of broth multiple times a day, it would be way better than those stupid fluoride shots we used to take in elementary school. And it would do wonders for building bones, joints, ligaments, tendons, and muscles, and help the gut, and so many other benefits. It really is something that you need to consume every day. And I said this off the air, Lance, but I mean it. My generation is the first brothless generation, because I promise you, Lance, your parents, your Bubby, your Grammy, your Yaya, whoever it was in your life made bone broth. They would never waste the bones of an animal. And I know that my grandmother back in Poland, her family made a big batch of bone broth every week. She was the youngest, so she would have to settle for some of the schmaltz and the gribbiness, which you know what that is. It is the rendered fat and the chicken skin, so to speak. But she got all the broth. And I can tell you, even though she came to America at age 13 and started eating 31 flavors and, dunked her donuts, if you know what I mean, she had great posture, great bone strength and health into her 80s. We are brothless today. We love the chicken breast. We love to eat some burgers, but our level of broth is virtually zero. And my good friend, who's a bone broth expert, has even created bone broth programs to help people satiate themselves and even lose weight. In fact, Lance, to add to this story, we've created bone broth cleanses where people consume bone broth protein for breakfast and lunch and eat a healthful dinner. And people have had incredible benefits because bone broth is so digestible, you can even consume it during times of intermittent or longer-term fasting.
Well, that's for me because I like to eat things when I'm fasting. So that helps. We've got, look, tomato basil. I didn't realize this, but during the winter, this is the best solution. The butternut squash, I just had my staff bring it out for me. And the tomato basil, which is my favorite soup, by the way, tomato soup. I don't know why. That saved me on January 6th. I went back to the Trump Hotel to have tomato soup instead of going to the Capitol. I was cold. Bone broth protein, chocolate, and you said there's did you say you had one that was like, it didn't have a taste to it, so you could put it on anything? Or
yeah,
like pancakes and mix it in with other stuff?
Better than, well, yes, you're absolutely right. Chocolate, vanilla are great in pancakes, but the pure is great. Think about it. You're making bolognese. Imagine getting 20 grams of protein in a sauce. What about a grain? Say that you're making rice or quinoa or whatever. Imagine getting 20 grams of protein right mixed in with the water. Not only does it taste better, but the grain just sucks it in. So some of the kids out there, including mine, like more carbs than proteins. And they're like, I don't want as much meat. I want more rice. I want more quinoa. You're getting them protein, and they don't even know it's in there other than the fact that it made it taste great. And if you like soup, you want to make good old-fashioned soup, but you don't really have the time, bolster it with bone broth protein pure. So there are 6 varieties. All of them are useful. I will tell you this, most people that I know prefer the chocolate slightly more than the vanilla. But when you're talking about pancakes, vanilla is great. People make all kinds of recipes. And if you go to ancientnutrition.com/Lance, you'll get a great discount. And you can find dozens, perhaps near 100 recipes of how to use bone broth protein in your diet. Since 2016, in the month of May, we are 8 years in the making with bone broth protein. Hundreds of thousands of people have benefited from the real food goodness. Ingredients that include, remember, bone broth protein, water, heat and pressure, and then of course for chocolate, vanilla, and the others, we add flavorings and we add tomato and we add butternut squash. But this is pure real food. It's patented. We created the concept, and now it's become really a global phenomenon. People are very excited about broth. There's books written about broth. There's TV shows about broth. And now you can make bone broth protein in seconds. And Lance, best of all, I mentioned for my knee rehab, consuming 2 24-ounce bags or containers of this frozen broth. Each scoop of bone broth protein has the equivalent in nutrition of that $10 24-ounce bag in one scoop that's going to cost you somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.
Amazing. Amazing. And by the way, I want you to use the code LancePlan, Lance, P-L-A-N, for those of you that are listening to the podcast, with ancientnutrition.com/Lance. In order to get up to 20, 25% off, depending on what you do. But this is like 5 times more potent than broth brands, Mercedes, that are out there in the market, because this is broth is, this bone stuff has been out there for a while. But I'm curious about this healthy gut and joints and inflammation, the gut part, because I'm finding, I open up the broadcast saying the stress and everything that is happening with what's going on in the world, I'm finding a lot of people internalize it, and they internalize it, goes to the stomach. So that's that gut health. The first time I heard it, I thought, what is that? And I realized it is so central. But this going to the inflammation process and going to healthy gut, I'm focusing more on that for my older demographic because it's so critical. Am I wrong on that, Jordan? That's a major factor, and that's going on here, right?
It is a major factor. And think about this. We have so many ancient principles that we follow, and we don't even know why. Here's a great example. When you are in the hospital, post-surgery, you're convalescing, they almost always bring you Jell-O and broth. Think about it. They say that you can't eat any solids until a certain period of time. You're on what they call a clear diet. You know why they call it clear? Because bone broth is soluble. It is in the form of highly digestible nutrition that you barely need to expend energy to utilize. There is a great saying, which I cannot confirm or deny, that it's a proverb, not in the Bible. It's, I think, a European proverb that good broth can raise the dead. Now, I'm telling you, I can't confirm that. But what they mean is that it is the first food to consume when you can consume nothing else. And the reason, Lance, is it is highly digestible. And in fact, in studies, we have shown that the main ingredient in bone broth protein, when given to individuals, actually shows an increase in probiotics or good bacteria and a decrease in bad bacteria. You're essentially starving the germs that you don't want and giving your body what it needs. It's a primal food, if you will.
Yes. Starving the germs you don't want. That's what I want to do. I want to starve the germs I don't want. I love it. You put things at a level I get. All right, now, and which makes you wonder if there's an intuitive wisdom of the ages. Before they had medical science and such, man was, and moms and grandmoms were trying to figure out the best way. It was as though God gave the instinct to say that chicken soup thing. I mean, I grew up with that. It's crazy. You talk about the Jewish penicillin. That's what my father said. That's what we grew up with. So right now, I want everybody to go to ancientnutritionist.com/Lance. You want to use that code. What is my code? Lance Plan. And you're going to get a discount. Mercedes, you're a young lady, but let's face it now. How many times have I been praying for people that have had digestion issues? We've got so many millennials because of their diet, Jordan. So many of these young people that have stomach issues and all kinds of stuff.
It's
surprisingly,
not because of their diet.
Huh?
You're blaming it on diet.
I think it's the
Anybody under
Doritos.
45.
I think it's the bad food.
No, I think it's genetically modified food that we were fed as small children before we knew what was going on. But I think a lot of people, like myself, there's certain sugars I can't process. I've gone gluten-free. I'm soy-free. All those things because I have adverse reactions. So I was just reading the labels here of what the bone broth protein has. And as Lance knows, I've started fasting because we're doing these courage tours. And when you're taking on national principalities, you got to do the basic things. You got to fast, you got to pray. And so I'm excited about this, Jordan, because I think I'm going to start doing this on my fasting days. So I'm doing like 24-hour fasts, and this is a great addition. I'm super excited about that.
Absolutely. And I have had many people try to cleanse and detoxify using juices. And I can tell you raw fruit and vegetable juices have some benefits, but when I come off of a juice fast, I look pretty rough, meaning I've lost weight. My skin kind of is a little gaunt, but when you consume broth during a fast, it has something called a protein spare effect, which means that you're able to maintain muscle and integrity while you're fasting, which is absolutely huge. It's a great way to cleanse, even if it's very opposite from raw juices. It's very cooked, but it is truly bringing ancient wisdom to the modern world.
Amen.
Wow, there's a great point, ladies. If you want to have that detoxing, beautiful fast, then you think about not looking gaunt, like, what I do when I fast. You know what I do when I fast? I don't shave. I look like Hemingway. I know you're not supposed to let the world know, but I like just going primitive, and I let my beard grow, and I'm fasting, and my hair's growing. I look like Steve Bannon on a bad day at the War Room.
Are you fasting today?
Or Wilson on a deserted island.
Or Wilson.
Not Wilson.
Yeah.
I'm yelling after Wilson.
Exactly, my friend. That's the situation. One quick question, the last minute we have. Everybody in my audience wants to know this. What is glucosamine? And they really don't know. I want to know. Glucosamine and chondroitin. Right. You use these words, and they have this and that. But for me, what are we talking about?
Yep. Glucosamine is called it's a group of polysaccharides known as glycosaminoglycans. Not that makes it any easier.
Thank you.
But these are building blocks of joints, ligaments, and tendons. So if you look inside your joint spaces, you have hyaluronic acid, glucosamine, and chondroitin. They're in the cushioning of your joints. And over time, they begin to decrease. And they have been shown at certain levels to help with knee and joint mobility, flexibility, reducing pain due to what they call overuse. So we're talking about the average person who has creaky knees, who isn't as fast as they once were on the basketball court, or in some cases, not able to walk up steps as quickly or having as solid balance as they can. Collagen type 2, along with glucosamine, chondroitin, and hyaluronic acid, occurs in very few foods, but it's primarily found in the chickens or poultry rather, sternal bones. So in the flexible cartilage in the sternum, that's where you get these naturally occurring glycosaminoglycans, which are the building blocks that surround connective tissue in your joint spaces, etc. That's why that Joint Revolution book, or whatever it was called, told everyone on the planet to consume glucosamine and chondroitin every day. Hyaluronic acid has been more newly discovered as a youth aid or a longevity secret because it is important for suppleness of your skin and flexibility of your joints. All of that is naturally occurring in old-fashioned bone broth and in large quantities in our bone broth protein, no matter what flavor or variety you choose.
Wow. Thanks see, I knew if I asked the question, I'd get more because the building blocks of the joints and the tendons. Now I understand more what we're doing. Mercedes, this is always a lesson.
Loving it. In
science and biology, while we're also learning how to be healthier. So once again, I've got right here the chocolate. I have the chocolate at home, by the way. And we're going to talk in another broadcast about combining the different, because I'm taking everything. I talked to you, and like I said, I'm using all the products, so then I need to know how to combine some of them. But this tomato basil, the idea that I could do this on a cold day, and you know something? Nothing better than a hot soup on a cold day, but this actually solves a problem for me because I don't like going to the old canned soup thing I grew up with. That's off for me now. All right, doctor. I want to thank you.
Lance, you can have your tomato basil soup with 15 grams of protein in it.
15 grams of protein, I'm telling you. And between the protein and the collagen, you've enlightened me to, and you have collagen in this too, 1, 2, and 3. We're going to have to, in a separate broadcast, we're going to ask you the difference between 1, 2, and 3 because there's 3 types, and I keep forgetting the difference. AncientNutrition.com/Lance. You want to use the code LancePlan and know that you're getting all 3 types of collagen in this product. Thank you, Dr. Rubin. Isn't that interesting?
Absolutely. I love having him on. It's like our very own Dr. Gupta.
I know, he is. He's like our own doctor. And I get every time I ask a question, he gives me another layer of interesting data. Like, I want to get this starving the germs out of your body. That's the way I want to see things going on when I'm eating something. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed this as much as me. I hope you do this like I'm doing this. And tell me what's happening with you. You want to use the Lance Plan as the code, AncientNutrition.com/Lance. I'm not recommending something I'm not doing. I'm actually doing it. And we'll see you again tomorrow.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends, because the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to navigate the world.